In this video, we're going to look at some methods for creating a driver control set for Rocket Randee. This driver control set will eventually control the front 3/4 Rocket Randee and the profile Rocket Randee at the same time so that you don't have to reanimate each pose. We're going to start with the left hand in this video and try a couple of different techniques for getting the positions to match. And in the next videos, we will continue with the rest of the body. Something that we did early on was we created consistent composition sizes for both puppets. If you look here, you can see the specs on each one. Each puppet setup is 7,000 by 7,000, and both sets of null objects are in very similar paces. And if you watched the earlier videos, you saw that we lined both puppets up right in the beginning so that they sat right over top of each other. So what we can do is actually create a control rig that would drive multiple rigs at once, and then we could flip between them. This isn't always the most efficient way to animate. I find in a lot of the videos I do that I actually only use one or two puppet rigs. I can find ways to make it work, and then I'll actually just bring in a new puppet rig if I want a side or a 3/4. Very rarely do I actually switch on the fly because it does add for complexity, and it doesn't make for the smoothest animation pipeline. But we're going to do it anyway because there's been a lot of people asking about how to do it, and it's definitely an interesting experiment and something to try. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new composition. You could just duplicate this composition and delete everything out of it, or just create a new one. It's pretty basic, so I think we could just create a new one. So yeah, let's go here. And we're saying to create a new composition, we're going to call this Rocket Randee linked. Okay, these will be our linked puppets. Two linked puppets. It's inherited the composition settings of the last selected comp, which is really great. Keeps everything nice and simple. So now we have an empty composition that is the exact same size as the last composition. So let's just put these to fit so we can see them all together. There we go. So as you can see, everything is lined up well, and you can see how the Rocket Randee rotates, which is helpful. And he's looking, I think, pretty good. So this is why I created, one of the reasons why I created this set of controllers on top that actually drove everything. So we're going to actually grab the 3/4. I often find that I use a 3/4 puppet the most, and it's just because it's more interesting to look at. And typically if characters are talking or you need them to address the screen, they address it at a 3/4. Even walk cycles work better at this kind of a 3/4 view than they do at a perfect side. Perfect side views, I find I don't use very often. I expected to use them a lot more, but I don't. I ended up really sticking to 3/4. So 3/4 is the strongest positioning that I find for some of the puppets. I'm going to use that as my base control structure. It also will give me access to both the left and the right limb automatically quite easily because they're spaced apart. They're not sitting right on top of each other. So I'm going to select the top controller and go to the bottom and select the bottom one. The reason my scroll bar is so short is because I have all the other layers hidden. And we don't need any of these. These layers are essentially being driven by these controllers, so we don't need to worry about everything else that makes this guy up. Just these layers that we have selected here. I'm going to press Control-C and copy these layers. I want to make sure I select them from top to bottom. If I select them from bottom to top, it will actually reverse the layer order when I paste them. I'm going to paste them in this scene. And so right now what you can see is there's these controls, and because they're so nicely labeled and everything is colored properly, it's pretty easy to get a sense of what's actually going on here. So we don't want the source name. I want to make sure we're looking at the layer name, and this is the master control. Now, what I can do to make this process a little more clear is actually just go in there right now and drag in a Rocket Randee puppet. Let's just put him down at the bottom here. And that gives us something to reference and look at. Okay, so now here comes the magic parts. Essentially, right now, nothing is going to work. Even though these objects are parented and everything, nothing's moving anything because nothing is linked together. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. Because the actual layer space of each composition is exactly the same, you actually don't need any special code to translate the objects together. They could have essentially the exact same properties, but we're going to use a piece of code that allows the object to maintain its offsets. What we're going to do first is these guys here are going to be our drivers. These are going to drive everything. So what I'm going to do initially is instead of just a C in the front, I'm going to add a D just because it's a driving control. I want to be able to see a differentiation between the name when I'm actually doing the coding, because I want it to be clear visually what I'm actually working with, especially when I'm looking at the code. Decenter and dmaster, DC master. So let's just start with one hand. So we're going to start everything here. So we're going to start with the left hand. We're going to get this left hand that is not connected to anything. This one here. And you know what? Actually, I keep accidentally selecting this bottom clip. So actually, and we want the side one. Let's put the side guy in here too. Now, the only thing that's going to happen is this might really slow things down because we have two puppets visible at once. So just pick one to have visible. Maybe drop the quality. You can drop the quality down if you want to keep things really simple. And right now we're in fast draft, which is good. Depends on your computer's processor, whether you should work in fast draft or your graphics card. Okay, so currently this left hand is not associated to anything. It doesn't pull anything around. Now, let's say you want this left hand to drive the side puppet hand. Let's go to the side Randee. And we're going to be linking this control hand left with this control hand left, okay? Even they're either in two different spots, and we're actually going to link all three of these together, and we're going to start with this one hand. We're going to go to this hand that currently doesn't drive anything to drive both the side guy and the 3/4 guy. Okay, so that is our goal. So we want to select both of these, make sure we have them. So let's get started. First, we'll start, I guess, let's start with a more complicated one. We're going to use both the positional data and the rotational data. Okay, so let's start with rotation since that's the easiest one. And I'm going to pull this guy, this composition. So I'm grabbing the tab here, and I'm just putting it above. So in this current view, it really does compress everything, and you can't see anything that's going on. So I have to stretch this up a lot because I want to keep this as easy as possible. So I'm going to select the rotation of this. Now, this is the length. Actually, let's call this, instead of linked, let's call it driver. Okay, because I want to maintain the concept that this composition is driving every other composition. So we're going to call it driver, so that way when we look at it, we know right away this is not a Randee puppet, this is a driver. And let's put this, instead of driver, let's put driver right in the beginning. D-R-I-V-E-R. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to develop this as we go, right? So let's take this driver hand, and we want this to essentially influence the side hand, and we just want the rotation value to come right over. Usually what I do when I do this is I'll select this value here, and I will add another value to it. We're going to create some variables just to keep things really tidy and clean, and instead of just the easy thing, actually, we'll start with the easy way. The easy way to do this without doing much of anything at all is to alt-click the rotation in the side Rocket Randee, alt-click it, and pick whip up to the rotation of the driver hand, okay? And then you let go. Now what's going to happen if we go into this composition and move the driver rotator? This number, so you see 29, the driven one turned to 29 as well. So let's see what that does. If we go into, I don't want to close this composition, but I know it's going to be hard to look at. But let's do this. Let's turn off 3/4 rocket guy. So now what we can see is that that hand controller here is actually directly driving the profile view of this puppet right here. So wherever this rotator goes, this hand goes. We can also do it to the 3/4 Randee puppet here by opening it here. Let's open its rotational value, alt-click it, and just directly grab from that value right there. So essentially now, if we go into this composition, and let's turn on both the side Randee and 3/4 Randee. So let's move them over. I'm going to put one over to this way and one over the other way. And we'll just put them back later. So this is our driving controller. Actually, we'll leave the 3/4 guy where he is and just move the side guy over. Okay, so now when we rotate this puppet, we're literally seeing both puppets correspond to this driving rotational value. Now this could be done over multiple puppets, but the more things you have going on, actually, the slower it gets to animate. So you just don't want all of them visible at once. But we're going to keep them two open at the same time so we can actually see what's going on. The more puppets that are open, the slower things will render. Right now, we have an absolute relationship between the rotational value of the driving the driving rig versus the rotational value of the hand left here. So it's if this is 25, this one's 25. No matter what I do in this composition, even if I want to make an adjustment, I can't do it. It won't read that value at all. Another way to create the code is to actually create a value. I'm just going to create a value. This will keep it really tidy and clean, and this makes it easier for you to read back later. So if you go driver, I'm going to put driver control rotation equals. So this is going to be my little piece of code, driver control rotation equals, and I'm just grabbing the rotation from this hand controller. I'm not going to make my name too complicated. And then I'll just take the rotation value of this actual layer and then just add the driver DC rotation to it. It pretty much does exactly the same thing when you actually work with it. So we're sitting in this composition. But what it allows me to do is if I want to make an adjustment to this hand, or I need it, it's not quite working and I need it at a different angle, I can change this angle in this composition alone, and this will still drive it, but it drives it at the adjusted level, right? So if I put this back to 0, it will correspond exactly, but I can also adjust it. So I find using that kind of code structure a lot more useful and more versatile, and it just keeps things cleaner and it makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to do the same thing for the 3/4 Rocket Randee here and just paste that code in there. And it should respond perfectly. Great. Okay, so I'm going to, I just made sure that I could make this work, and I want to show you how to make this happen. So we have the 3/4 Rocket Randee puppet, and then we have the driver right here. Currently, nothing happens when I move the driver around, but when I rotate it, it rotates the other two. So I worked on a little piece of code based on other things that I have done before, and what I've got is this little chunk here. Now, I don't want to go too much into what this is doing, but this is essentially saying take the position of the layer that we want to track and turn it to a world space, and then take it from a world space and apply it to the position of this current object, okay? Okay, so we're going to we want the hand left of the 3/4 Rocket Randee. We want to be in this composition here, and we want to select the position, not the rotation, and alt-click it, and paste that piece of code. And where L equals the composition and layer you want to follow, just select all of that. And let's select the layer we want to follow, which is way up here. And this is the hand left. We don't need to select the position. We just select the layer we're looking for, because this bit of code takes care of what we're tracking. From that, what you'll see is that the hand in the 3/4 Rocket Randee will actually follow the hand position. Now, this won't be very clear at first, but we're going to do it to the side one as well, okay? Let's grab the same chunk of code, copy it. We're going to go to side Rocket Randee, make sure we have the hand left selected, go into the position, alt-click it, and paste. Now, it may move into a weird spot because the positional data is a little bit skewed. So let's take a look at the driver Rocket Randee and make him full screen. And let's just see what happens. It might be a bit slow at first because it's trying to render two compositions at the same time. But as you can see, I am literally tracking the hand of two different puppets to exactly this same null object. When I move this one here, the other composition follows. Now it runs really slow on this computer. And it's basically because I have both compositions showing. If I just show one composition, let's just go down here, and we'll only enable one. So let's actually enable the profile rocket guy. That makes it more clear. Things are considerably faster. It's still not the fastest way to work though. Like I said before, this is not an ideal solution because it seems to take quite a bit of processing power to actually pull it off. There may be better ways to do this, and I would actually really appreciate anybody who has better ideas on how to pull this off. I would urge you to come forward and then maybe inform me and anyone else how to do this. We'd love to know. So currently there is a one-to-one relationship to that positional data, and that's not exactly what I want because when the puppet's in the side mode, his hand's not necessarily all the way back like that just because it's out to the side. So what I need to do is I need to include the offset that I already have here. So the hand might be down here at the side. One way to do this is to go into the code and just go here and put value plus. And now things might look really skewed, but what it's doing is it's adding the current positional data of this layer with the positional data of the controlling layer up here. Okay, so when we look, we'll turn the 3/4 guy back on. It does slow things down quite horrifically. Plus, these compositions are so huge. If you use much smaller puppets, it would be faster. But anyways, so as I move this, it's adjusting accordingly. Now, what I do want though is I don't want this arm to be way far out here like this. So I can go into the side rocket guy and just adjust it and put it in the place I want it to be. There we go. I just want it to be straight down like that. So now, when we're in the actual driver, now it will control it from that position. This basic principle will drive all of the existing joints and pieces on this puppet. The one thing that will become essential is when do we show which puppet and how often, because this process, like I said, is not that fast. If we were to animate the puppet directly, so let's go into 3/4 Randee and just pull him around, you can see that things move pretty quickly. Oh, and let's change this to value as well. Value plus. And for this one, oops. And for the 3/4 guy, I'm just going to set it to 0 and 0, which will look weird when I disable it, but when I actually have it on, it'll look fine. Now, you can see when I'm moving this guy around with just this composition alone, it's very fast. If I'm working in this one, it is pretty slow. Even when I only have one puppet visible, it is still very slow by comparison. And this is because After Effects is running a calculation as it's animating everything here. It's running a calculation to make the other puppet fit. So it's doing this math the whole time. Now the big test here is to do an animation test. Position of this and pull this up. And let's see what happens. It should animate. There we go. And we'll turn on the other puppet and make sure they're both animating. Sometimes when you do expressions, they actually don't animate properly, especially if you, for instance, have a composition like this shoved over and you expect it to animate the same, but it doesn't. And it's because the calculations are offset. So it's definitely something to think about. Now, you think it's slow now. If you have a ton of puppets, this process will pretty much grind to a halt. It will be very slow. There may be a better way to do this. The math is really quite simple. Perhaps a better way would be to have all the puppet layers in one place, and you would turn them on and off as you need them. Okay, there is another way that we could do this, and I'm not sure if this will be faster or not. So we'll try this alternate method. I'm going to delete this code off this guy, and we'll do it off this side guy as well. Another method is, instead of using that to and from world comp, because our compositions are exactly the same size, they actually occupy the same spatial information, like the same space, because both compositions are 7,000 by 7,000, and both characters live in the exact same world. And because they're parented the same, they should correspond to each other very similarly. This wouldn't necessarily be the case with props and other things, but it may actually work in this situation. So let's go and let's grab this hand again. And I'm just going to get rid of the animation. And right now our hands are positioned at 0. I'll put this one to 0 and 0 as well, since the other hand is there too. We'll take a look here and here. So one way we can do this is take the positional data and actually just directly connect the two, because they're very much the same. We just do that. And then what I'll do is just go value plus. Okay. That gives us the ability to modify it. And let's just see if this is any faster. Doesn't seem to be much faster. Still seems to be struggling. Maybe it's a touch faster. It's hard to tell. Maybe a touch. Well, let's see what happens when we get both involved. Let's grab the side hand and let's do the same thing. The position on this one is equal exactly to the position of this one plus the value. Value plus. And let's see what happens. We'll go back into the driver character. Now we have both puppets running. Yeah, it's still pretty horrifically slow. Quite sure. I mean, I think the problem, one of the biggest problems, is the composition is so huge. Like it's a 7,000 by 7,000 composition, and that's probably what's really causing the problem. This method would most likely be feasible with other smaller comps, but it's really not rolling the way I'd like to with front and with the front 3/4 and side. I've done it before with much smaller characters, and it seems to work. But for this particular application, it is really quite cumbersome. Yeah, like I wouldn't want to animate this slowly. Like positioning characters this slowly is really not fun. Try a different resolution mode and see what that does. Oh, this is much faster. Actually, in adaptive mode, it seems to work much better. Okay, so in fast draft, it's a lot slower and not even a feasible animation tool. But in adaptive, it is much faster. That's interesting. So I would say it's still a feasible technique. So anyways, we currently have both characters lining up quite nicely. I think what I'm going to do is just position this arm where I would consider it neutral. We'll do the full puppets together and just get them where we want them. I'm just going to adjust this guy. So this is a nice side pose there. So now when we go into the driver puppet, they're starting out and finishing in the same place. Okay, I think that looks really good. Great, that works pretty well. In the next video, we'll continue to refine the controls for the left hand and then move on to the right hand and other parts of Rocket Randee's body. If you like what ED Films is doing and want to stay up to date on the latest developments and tutorials, please show your support by liking us on Facebook.